Smoke over Montmartre, Paris, March 1871. After enduring months of siege during the Franco-Prussian War, the city's residents are exhausted. But now, with their German invaders gone, they face another challenge: famine. Food is scarce and the city's distribution system has collapsed. The people have had enough. As a result, tensions between the residents and the provisional government in place since the war broke out have reached a boiling point. And now an angry mob is preparing to storm two of the city's key government buildings. At the heart of this maelstrom are three unlikely revolutionaries: Eloise, a young nurse from the working-class neighborhood of Bouleville; Lucien, a disillusioned former soldier who's just returned from captivity; and Henry, a radical printer and activist who runs a clandestine newspaper. Our story follows these three individuals and their struggle to survive in a city that is tearing itself apart. Let's jump in. Eloise is a nurse who works at a makeshift hospital set up in the basement of a church in her neighborhood of Bellevue. For months, she's tended to the sick and wounded as the war rages above. But now that the Germans are gone, she faces a new challenge: caring for children who haven't eaten in days. People have been reduced to eating dogs and cats, she says, shaking her head in disbelief. Outside, a crowd gathers, chanting bread. Bread. We want bread. Eloise knows that if she doesn't get food for the children soon, it will be too late. So she joins the crowd, determined to get what she needs. Among the throng, Eloise sees one of her patients, Lucien, who was badly wounded by a cannonball while fighting for the National Guard. He tells her that he's fine, but Eloise isn't convinced. She wants to help him, but he pushes her away, saying he has nothing left to give her. As the crowd marches on, Lucien grows increasingly agitated. He says he feels like a rat in a trap, unsure which way to turn. Eloise tries to calm him down, but he's too overwhelmed to listen. Instead, he lashes out at her, pushing her to the ground and running off. Eloise is heartbroken. She thought she could help Lucien, but now she realizes he's too far gone. Meanwhile, at a printing press in the Latin Quarter, Henry is hard at work producing his clandestine newspaper. He's determined to keep the revolution alive, but he's running out of time. The provisional government is cracking down on dissent, and if they find his printing press, he'll be arrested. Just as he's about to give up hope, he hears a knock at the door. It's a young woman named Louise, and she tells Henry that she has something important to give him. When he opens the package, he finds a letter from his brother Pierre, who's been missing in action since the start of the war. In the letter, Pierre tells Henry that he survived the siege and is on his way home. Henry is overjoyed. He hadn't given up hope of seeing his brother again. But now, he can't believe it's true. As the people march on the Tuileries Palace, Henry runs to tell his friend Gustave about the good news. On the way, they run into a group of soldiers who tell them that the National Guard has surrendered the cannons to the government. This is bad news for the provisional government, because now the people have no choice but to fight back. The soldiers tell Henry and Gustave that they're going to arrest everyone at the barricades, including women and children. This gives Henry an idea. He tells Gustave to get the word out through the grapevine that the National Guard is surrendering the cannons. He then goes to the barricades himself and starts shouting for everyone to come out and fight. Meanwhile, at the Luxembourg Palace, Eloise has just gotten the food she needs for the children when she hears gunshots outside. She rushes to the window and sees people running for cover as soldiers fire into the crowd. She knows that she has to get the children to safety. But where can she go? With the streets too dangerous, Eloise gathers the children and hides them in the basement of the church. Then she goes upstairs to see what's happening. Outside, the situation is deteriorating rapidly. The soldiers are getting ready to fire on the barricades. Eloise watches in horror as they take aim and open fire. She can hear the screams of the wounded over the roar of the guns. She has to do something. But what? She can't fight the soldiers, but maybe she can reason with them. Eloise steps out of the building and calls for the soldiers to stop. They ignore her, though, and continue firing. Eloise isn't giving up, though. She starts to walk towards the soldiers, trying to get them to listen to her. Finally, one of the soldiers lowers his gun and asks her what she wants. Eloise tells him that he can't shoot unarmed civilians. The soldier tells her that he's sorry, but he has orders from his superiors. Eloise isn't convinced and continues to argue with him. Finally, the soldier breaks down and tells her that he doesn't want to shoot her either. Eloise sees her chance and asks the soldier if he'll help her get the wounded to safety. He agrees, and together they get the injured away from the line of fire. Meanwhile, Henry has just finished distributing Gustave's latest pamphlet calling for a general strike when he hears a commotion outside. He looks out the window and sees that the street has been barricaded. Cannons are being brought in and soldiers are readying themselves to fire. Henry knows that things are about to get very bad. Lucien, meanwhile, has made his way to the Latin Quarter and is wandering the streets aimlessly. He is still in shock from the horrors he's seen, and he doesn't know what to do next. Suddenly, he sees a group of soldiers approaching, and he hides behind a nearby barricade. The soldiers ask him if he's seen anyone else around, but he shakes his head. They leave, and Lucien lets out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Back at the Luxembourg Palace, Eloise is tending to the wounded when she hears a knock at the door. She opens it to find Henry, who tells her that the situation outside is getting worse. He needs her help to distribute more pamphlets, but she tells him that she can't leave. The wounded need her, and besides, she's afraid of what might happen to her if she's caught outside. Henry understands, but he tells her that she has to do something if she wants to help the people of Paris. Eloise thinks about this and eventually agrees to help him. Together, they make their way through the streets of Paris, dodging soldiers and barricades. They hand out pamphlets calling for a general strike, but not everyone is receptive to their message. Some people just want to fight, and they don't care about the consequences. Others are too afraid to get involved, but Eloise and Henry are undeterred. They know that they're risking their lives, but they also know that they're fighting for a greater cause. As the days go by, the situation in Paris becomes increasingly chaotic. The government is losing control of the city, and the people are becoming more and more radical. Eloise, Lucien, and Henry find themselves caught in the middle, trying to survive and help others along the way. But as the violence escalates, they have to decide how far they're willing to go. Will they be able to stay true to their ideals, or will they be swept up in the madness? Only time will tell. What did you think of this episode? Did you like it? If so, let us know in the comments. We've got lots of other historical tales here, so subscribe if you want to catch more of our episodes. And thank you for watching. We talked about the siege of Paris that happened during the Franco-Prussian War between France and Germany in 1870 and 71. And we talked about how it led up to this moment. So today, we're going to see what happens next. This is an excerpt from my novel The Shadow of the Eiffel Tower, which is set in 1871 during the siege of Paris. Chapter 2, The Red Flag Rises. The streets were thick with smoke and the stench of stale waste. Huddled in their draughty rooms, the people of Paris had waited anxiously for news. Had the National Assembly declared the end of the siege? Would food be arriving soon? Or would they have to wait yet another day for the Prussians to lift the blockade? Rumors spread like wildfire through the city. Many believed the Prussians would soon be forced to retreat. Others feared the French army would abandon the city rather than risk being captured by the enemy. But while the citizens of Paris waited for deliverance, their leaders prepared to take matters into their own hands. On March 18, 1871, two members of the National Guard entered the Assembly Hall where the National Assembly was meeting. They carried a white flag emblazoned with a red tricolor. When they reached the assembly, the men halted and shouted, "Long live the Commune," before dropping to their knees and presenting the flag to the deputies. It was then that the deputies realized the power had shifted in Paris. The people had grown tired of waiting for their leaders to end the siege. They wanted action, and they were willing to take matters into their own hands. Some deputies opposed the idea of a revolt. Others argued that the National Assembly should join the insurgents. A small group, however, saw an opportunity. Perhaps they could use the revolution to seize control of the government. As the debate raged, the two men who had delivered the flag stood up. One of them stepped forward and said, "You are too late. The revolution has already begun." Outside, thousands of Parisians gathered on the streets, demanding that the National Assembly vote to end the siege. But when the deputies failed to reach a consensus, the crowd grew angry and broke down the doors. The legislators fled, most of them making their way to Versailles, where they hoped they'd be safe. But they weren't safe. And we'll talk about that more next time. Meanwhile, back at the Paris, the insurgents took control of the city hall and established what became known as the Paris Commune. They pulled down the old regime's tricolor flag and raised a new one, a red flag with the words liberty, equality, fraternity emblazoned across it. The red flag became a symbol of the revolution, a sign of hope for those who had suffered through the long winter of discontent. It was also a warning to the rest of Europe that France was ready to rise up against tyranny. And now the city needed leaders to guide the Commune. To run the city, they turned to some of the most respected members of society. Georges Clemenceau, a physician who had served in the French Assembly since 1848. His fierce opposition to the war had made him unpopular with many of his fellow deputies, but he was highly respected by the people of Paris. Then there was Eugene Varlin, a factory owner who had used his wealth to help the poor during the siege. Finally, there was Louise Michel, a former school teacher who had become a leader of the militant feminist movement. Together, they formed the executive committee of the Commune, which effectively ran the city. Lucien, Eloise, and Henry woke to the sound of cannons. What was happening? Had the Prussians invaded Paris? Had the National Assembly finally ended the siege? Lucien couldn't tell, but he felt a strange sense of foreboding. He dressed quickly and hurried downstairs. Outside, red flags bearing the words liberty, equality, fraternity flew from every building. On the corner of every street, armed members of the National Guard stood watch. As Lucien walked toward his shop, he passed a group of men unloading crates from a truck. The men were arguing loudly among themselves. Lucien stopped and asked one of them what was going on. "Don't you know?" The man snapped. "The siege is over. We're bringing the wounded back from the front lines." Lucien looked at the boxes. Some of them were marked with a red cross. Inside, he knew, were the wounded and dying soldiers. Lucien's brother Henry owned a printing press and was known for producing underground newspapers critical of the government. Over the years, Lucien had tried to convince Henry to move to the provinces, to leave Paris and start a new life somewhere safe. But Henry had refused, saying he couldn't abandon the city in the fight for liberty. Now Lucien worried for his brother's safety. What if the Prussians attacked? How would Henry defend himself? When he arrived at the shop, he found Heloise waiting for him. Her face was pale and her eyes were filled with worry. "Lucien," she said, "I need your help." "What's wrong?" he asked. "I want to help the wounded," she said. "Can I come with you?" "You can," Lucien replied, surprised by his own answer. Before the siege, he had never even considered that women might participate in the defense of Paris. But during the siege, he had watched as women took on all kinds of tasks to help their communities. Many of them had volunteered at soup kitchens or as nurses. Some had even joined the barricades. They arrived at the hospital to find a scene of chaos. There were wounded soldiers everywhere. Some of them were lying on stretchers, while others sat or stood against the wall. Blood covered the floor and the sheets. Everywhere Lucien looked, he saw suffering, pain and despair. Despite the terrible conditions, he felt a sense of purpose. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just a bystander. He was actually doing something. Later, after helping to unload the trucks, Lucien returned home feeling exhausted but satisfied. That night, he and Heloise talked for hours about the events of the day. They discussed the siege, the revolution, and what the future might hold for them. Lucien had never been so happy to just sit in his little apartment, surrounded by the familiar objects, the smell of stale waste and the sound of distant cannon fire. He had seen too much death, too much destruction, and too much despair. All he wanted was to go back to his old life, to the time before the siege, before the revolution, before all the pain and suffering began. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Lucien and Eloise looked at each other nervously. Who could it be at this hour? Lucien got up and walked to the door. Through the peephole, he saw a man in uniform. He was holding a paper in his hand. "Who is it?" Lucien asked. "A message for you," the man said, handing Lucien a sealed envelope. Lucien opened the envelope and read the message inside. It was from Henry. He was being summoned to a meeting at the printing press. Lucien looked up to see the man still standing in the hallway. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Of course," the man said, and he turned to leave. "Wait," Lucien called out. "What's your name? Where are you from?" "I'm from the National Guard," the man replied. "We'll see you tomorrow," he added, and then he was gone. Lucien and Eloise looked at each other again. This time there was understanding in their eyes. They didn't need to say anything. They both knew what the message meant. The revolution had taken another turn and Henry needed their help. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave me a review. It really helps the channel. Also, thank you to my supporters. I'll see you next time. In the smoke-filled back rooms of Parisian cafes, men argued about how to run the city. Down in the cobbled streets, Eloise raced against time to save the lives of wounded children. And up in the bell tower, Lucien kept watch over the rooftops, ready to sound the alarm when the Versaillais came for the Commune. This is the story of the Paris Commune of 1871, a time when Parisians seized control of their city and created an alternative government that existed for 264 glorious days before it was crushed by the French army. It was the world's first experiment in socialism and communism, and it changed the course of history. But our story starts a little before that. In the year 1870, Europe was at war. The Germans were marching into France, and the French were digging in their heels to defend their homeland. On September 1870, after a month of fighting, the French army got completely obliterated at the Battle of Sedan. Over 100,000 soldiers were captured and sent to prison camps, including the future writer and intellectual leader of the Commune, Charles Deleuze. With the country effectively leaderless and in tatters, the remaining troops retreated into Paris and the surrounding countryside, determined to make a last stand against the Germans. On September 28, 1870, the German army began its siege of Paris. Food soon became scarce within the city, and the threat of starvation loomed over the residents. By early March 1871, the situation had become dire. There were only a few weeks' worth of food left in the city and no sign of relief from the siege. Things were looking bleak for the Parisians. That is until March 18th, when the Germans and the French government finally signed an armistice agreement. Although the war wasn't over yet, this at least put a hold on the fighting. But the French government saw this as a good opportunity to get out while the getting was good. They wanted to move the capital to Tours in the south of France so that they could continue running the country from there. For the people of Paris, already suffering from hunger and exhaustion, this was one bridge too far. On March 18th, workers and students gathered together in the streets to protest against the government's decision. But the peaceful demonstrations quickly turned into riots. Within hours, barricades had been set up across the city and the government's authority had effectively collapsed. This uprising was not directed at the Germans, but against the French government itself. The National Guard, a kind of reserve military force made up of ordinary citizens, sided with the protesters and took control of key government buildings, including the Hôtel de Ville, or town hall. The mayor and the police prefect fled the city, and in their place, the insurgents set up a temporary government, the Paris Commune, which would go on to rule the city for the next 8 months. It was a heady time filled with idealism and hope for a better future. Indeed, it was only a few years earlier that Karl Marx had written in his book, Das Kapital, that the working class would eventually rise up and seize control of the means of production. And here it seemed that the workers of Paris had done exactly that. They were living proof that Marx's ideas could be put into practice. At this point, let's meet some of the people who lived through this extraordinary period. Eloise is a doctor working at a small clinic in the Latin Quarter. Her days are spent treating gunshot wounds, typhoid fever, and the many other ailments that affect the poor residents of Paris. As the city descends into chaos, her work becomes more and more dangerous. The streets are full of snipers, and it's becoming harder and harder to get supplies. But she doesn't hesitate for a moment. She knows that she has a duty to help the sick and the wounded, regardless of what's happening outside. Then there's Lucien, who works as a clock repairer by day. When the fighting breaks out, he joins the National Guard and takes up a position in a nearby bell tower. From his vantage point, he can see everything that is happening in the streets below, and he uses this to keep the other National Guardsmen informed. He also keeps a lookout for the Versaillais, a right-wing military force loyal to the exiled government, who are waiting for their chance to retake the city. And finally, we have Henry, a young writer who spends his days hanging round cafes and art studios, talking about politics and philosophy with his friends. He's a kind of dandy, always impeccably dressed and ready with a witty remark. But beneath his flippant exterior, he's a man on a mission to change the world. He believes that the Commune is the start of something new, a new way of governing, a new society based on equality and freedom. He wants to be part of this new world. but he's not sure how he can contribute. So what did these idealists actually do while the adults were away? Well, like all good revolutionaries, they started with the youth. They introduced free public education for children. Before this, education had been a privilege reserved for the wealthy elite. But now every child, regardless of their background, had the opportunity to learn to read and write. This was a huge step forward for women's rights. The Commune also introduced a number of measures to improve the lives of working people. These included a reduction in working hours, an increase in wages, and the introduction of universal male suffrage. And then there was the issue of religion. The Catholic Church had been closely tied to the French state since the days of Louis XIV. But now the Commune decided to break that link once and for all. They introduced a law separating church and state, which meant that the clergy would no longer receive state salaries and that religious instruction would be removed from schools. This was a controversial move, but it was nonetheless a step towards a more secular society. Eloise's clinic was one of the centers of activity. In the evenings, after the fighting had died down, she would invite the local children in for hot meals and educational activities. Many of these children had been orphaned by the war or were too poor to attend school. But Eloise didn't care about any of that. She saw these children as the future of France, and she wanted to give them every opportunity to succeed. Meanwhile, Lucien's job was becoming more and more dangerous. The Versailles army was getting closer to the city, and the National Guard was getting ready to fight. He knew that it might be his last stand, but he was ready. He had seen too much death and destruction to want to live in a world where people could just kill each other for fun. And what about Henry? Well, he was in his element. He loved the energy of the city. He loved the sense of possibility that hung in the air. He felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, something that was going to change the world. He wrote articles for the Commune newspaper, the Credu pupil, and gave speeches at public meetings. He was everywhere and nowhere, a kind of ghost that floated through the city, observing and commenting on everything that went on around him. But as time went on, the reality of the situation began to dawn on him. The Commune was just a small group of idealists trying to hold on to power in a city that wasn't really theirs to begin with. They were fighting against a powerful and well-organized army, and they knew that they were outgunned and outnumbered. Still, they held on, and they held on for as long as they could. In May 1871, the Versailles finally stormed the city. The Commune was crushed and its leaders were executed or exiled. But the idea of the Commune lived on. It inspired future generations of socialists and communists around the world, and it showed them that it was possible to create a different kind of society, a society based on equality and freedom. As for our three friends, their stories ended in tragedy. Eloise was arrested and sent to a labor camp in Germany, where she died of starvation. Lucien was executed by the Versailles army, and Henry was forced to flee the country. But their stories could have ended quite differently. After all, they were just ordinary people who had lived through an extraordinary time. They were the kind of people who could have gone either way, but they chose to fight for a better world. And that's what made them heroes. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd also like to thank our supporters for their support. Their support allows us to keep making high-quality videos that we hope everyone can enjoy. If you'd like to learn more about the Paris Commune, we've included a number of resources in the description below. The air in Paris crackles with tension. In just a few days, the Versailles government will attempt to retake the city. So far, Their two attempts have failed. But this time, the attackers are better prepared. How will the communards defend themselves against an army that's angry about being humiliated? Let's find out. It's March 1871. For nearly a month, the streets of Paris have been under the control of radicals. They call themselves the communards. Now, it's not like the citizens of Paris rose up in anger and overthrew the government. No, this government was elected by the people. It just wasn't very good at its job, and after centuries of frustration, the Parisians had finally reached the boiling point. They demanded radical change, and they weren't going to take no for an answer. But now those same Parisians need to defend their city because the government in exile in Versailles is preparing a third attempt to retake Paris. And they won't make the same mistakes as before. Lucien has been working day and night in the forges of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine to supply the National Guard with weapons. His old commander, General Clinchant, now leads the assault on the city. As one of the leaders of the uprising, he's made himself a lot of enemies, including the one person he never expected, his former soldier, Lucien. Their paths crossed only a few weeks ago, when the young socialist prevented his former commander from shooting an unarmed woman. At the time, Lucien had explained that his humanity was forged in the fires of the June Rebellion and it hadn't melted in the two following decades. But since then, Clisang has become disillusioned with these so-called moderates. He doesn't want to hear about humanitarianism, when the lives of thousands of soldiers and citizens could be saved by taking a few. He'd given the order to fire on unarmed civilians, but it was only after hearing a single shot that he realized he'd gone too far. If the people of Paris were so easily intimidated, how would they defend the city from outside invaders? The general asked himself, but before he could come up with an answer, he got his marching orders from the exiled government. They wanted Paris back, and they wanted it now. But as we know, it's not that easy. When the Versaillais attempted to enter the city en marche, they were beaten back by the communards. Why? Because the insurgents controlled the heights round Paris. General Clinchant knows this, so he chooses his positions carefully. The first troops he sends into the city enter through the Porte de Chambret and quickly take the train station, cutting communications between the southern part of the city and the rest of the country. At the same time, other forces enter through the nearby Porte de Vanves, while a third force takes the high ground to the east near the Buttes Chaumont. These 3 points of entry are critical. If the Versailles troops can hold them, the city will be theirs. Henry makes his way through the barricades, hoping to reach his printing press in the Latin Quarter. Ever since the communards took over, he's used his presses to print underground newspapers supporting the new government. It's dangerous work. The Versailles government considers him a threat to the Republic, and they haven't been shy about arresting suspected troublemakers. Today, though, he needs to get to the printing press to get an important message out. When he reaches the barricade, he asks the guards if he can pass. "What are you doing here?" They ask. "I'm going to my printing press," says Henry. "You'll go with me," says one of the guards. "I have something to show you." He leads Henry away from the barricade and into a courtyard. There, on the ground, is a pile of wood and a few old barrels. "Why is that there?" Henry asks. "They're for the barricades," the guard says. "Versailles wants us to build these things instead of defending the city." Henry looks at the crude barricades, then back at the guard. "Why don't you stop them?" He asks. "How can we do that?" The guard asks. "We have no food, no weapons, no way to fight back. Because you've given up," Henry tells him. As long as you still have courage, you can fight back. You can stop them. The guard stares at him for a moment. Are you crazy? He asks. No, I'm not crazy. You're crazy if you think Versailles will let us win. We can't beat them in a fair fight, so we'll have to give them an unfair one. The guard shakes his head. I don't understand. Henry places his hand on the guard's shoulder. You will, he says. Soon enough. Then he leaves the courtyard and heads back to the barricade, leaving the guard behind with his thoughts. Glissang watches from a distance as the Versailles troops take up their positions. He's confident they'll be able to hold them. The only question is, how long will it last? And who will win in the end? But while the general thinks about strategy, a young woman named Eloise tends to the wounded in a makeshift hospital. She's taken over a nearby convent and turned it into a place of healing. Since the fighting began, she's done everything she can to help the injured and dying. But now her supplies are running low, and she desperately needs more medical equipment and food. She sends one of her assistants to a local pharmacy to get more supplies. But when the young man returns, he has bad news for her. The pharmacy was just raided. He tells her, by whom? Asks Eloise. The Versailles, he replies. They took everything they could find and left us with nothing. A look of determination comes over Elise's face. Then we'll just have to make do with what we have, she says. She knows she'll have to be resourceful if she wants to continue helping the wounded. The fighting is only getting more intense and the casualties are mounting. But she's not afraid. She's determined to do everything she can to help. Back in the streets, the Versailles troops are making their way through the barricades, forcing the defenders to retreat. They're taking heavy losses, but they're making progress. Soon, they'll be at the barricades outside the Luxembourg Palace. Suddenly, a voice booms out over the rooftops. Citizens, I bring you greetings from the National Guard. The enemy is at the gate. Our brave comrades are holding them off, but they need your help. Come and join us in the fight for our freedom. The voice echoes through the empty streets, calling on the citizens of Paris to rise up and defend their city. Will they answer the call? As the Versailles close in on the Luxembourg Palace, the situation becomes increasingly desperate. The communards are outnumbered and outgunned, but they refuse to give up. They fight with the determination of those who have nothing left to lose. Suddenly, a group of women appears carrying jugs of water and wine. They distribute the liquids to the defenders, who drink deeply and prepare to make their last stand. The Versailles troops close in, but they're met with fierce resistance. The communards fight until the very end, and many of them die. But their sacrifice does not go in vain. The Versailles troops are unable to take the palace, and they're forced to retreat. As the smoke clears, the citizens of Paris begin to emerge from their hiding places. They look round them at the destruction all round them and wonder what the future holds for their city. The fighting is over, but the war is not. And as the Versailles troops regroup and prepare for their next attack, the citizens of Paris must decide what they will do next. Will they continue to resist, or will they try to negotiate a peace? Only time will tell. And thank you for watching. The women in the Paris Commune of 1871 were vital to its survival. They worked as nurses, fighters and organizers. And at the heart of it all was one woman who went from being a seamstress to becoming a leader. Welcome to my channel. In this series, we tell stories about remarkable people from history and give you a chance to learn about their lives through the fiction we create inspired by them. In this episode, we bring you the story of one such woman named Eloise. It's March 1871 and Eloise is sitting in her room with her friend Louise Michel. Outside, the streets of Paris are filled with revolution. It's been 3 weeks since the city fell into chaos after the defeat of the Franco-Prussian War. Government officials fled the city, leaving it without leadership and ripe for the taking. Parisians rose up and formed a new revolutionary government, the Paris Commune. For the first time in French history, citizens took control of their own governance. Eloise has been watching the revolution unfold with a mix of fear and excitement. On one hand, she doesn't want to be caught up in it. On the other, she longs to play a part in creating a better world. She works as a seamstress by day, spending her time surrounded by fabric, thread, and the ghosts of those who came before her. Her mother died when she was young, leaving her to be raised by her grandmother, a former servant in the house of a wealthy family. Growing up, Eloise had heard stories of her mother's strength and compassion, a woman who, despite facing hardship and loss, never gave up hope for a better future for herself or her daughter. Her grandmother also told her tales of the French Revolution of 1848, a time when workers took to the streets to demand better conditions and an end to poverty. Though Eloise was too young to remember it, the revolution sparked a fire in her soul that refused to be extinguished. As the days passed, the desire to contribute to the commune grew stronger within her. One evening, while sewing, she confessed her thoughts to Louise. "I want to do something, anything," she said, her voice trembling. "But what?" Louise asked, reaching out to squeeze Eloise's hand. "You are strong, my friend," she said, her eyes shining with admiration. "And the revolution needs strong women like you." The next day, Eloise visited the Union des Femmes, a group of volunteers providing medical aid and food to those wounded in the fighting. As she stepped inside, she was greeted by a bustling scene. Women bustled about, tending to the wounded, preparing meals and organizing supplies. Among them was a young doctor tending to a young man with a bandage round his head. His hair was a mess, his clothes torn and his face pale. Yet there was a determined set to his jaw that captivated Eloise. She soon learned that the young man was Lucien, a member of the National Guard who had been injured during a recent skirmish. Drive Delphina, noticing Eloise's rival, approached her. "Welcome to the Union des Femmes," she said warmly. "We're so glad you're here. We need all the help we can get." Dr. Delphina explained that the fighting had left many wounded and the group was struggling to cope with the numbers. Eloise felt a surge of determination. This was where she belonged. She began by assisting the nurses, helping them bathe and dress the wounds of the injured. But she quickly found that her true calling lay elsewhere. As the days turned into weeks, Eloise became indispensable to the Union des Femmes. Her strength and compassion shone through in everything she did. She organized the distribution of food and supplies to those in need, all the while tending to the wounded and comforting the dying. She even learned to treat minor injuries herself, much to the amusement and sometimes concern of the doctors. Through it all, Eloise couldn't help but steal glances at Lucien. She found herself drawn to his quiet strength and unwavering determination. When he wasn't on duty, they would talk for hours about the revolution and their hopes for the future. Eloise's heart fluttered whenever he was near. She knew that theirs was a dangerous time to be thinking about such things, but she couldn't help but hope that one day their friendship might blossom into something more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, Lucien approached Eloise. He looked troubled. "Eloise," he began, his voice serious, "we have a problem." He explained that the commune was running low on supplies and morale was beginning to dwindle. We need a victory, something to boost the spirits of our people, he said, his eyes searching hers. But I don't see how, Eloise replied, her brow furrowed in thought. The National Guard is worn down, and the Versailles have us outnumbered. We have to take the offensive, a voice suddenly boomed. The women turned to see Louise striding toward them, her face flushed with excitement. The women of the Union des Femmes will organize a mass demonstration in support of the Commune, she announced. It will be a show of force, a reminder to the Versailles that they are not alone. Over the next few days, the women of the Union des Femmes worked tirelessly to prepare for the demonstration. Eloise and Lucien walked side by side through the bustling streets, their hands brushing occasionally, sending sparks flying between them. They joined Louise and other members of the Union, rallying the people of Paris to stand up for the Commune. On the day of the demonstration, Eloise found herself swept up in a sea of people. Women of all ages and backgrounds marched together, their voices rising in unison as they chanted slogans in support of the Commune. The men of the National Guard stood shoulder to shoulder, ready to protect the women if needed. The crowd surged forward, filling the streets and spilling into the open squares. The women's voices echoed through the city, a powerful testament to their strength and unity. But as the demonstration reached its peak, a sudden commotion broke out at the barricades. Shots rang out, shattering the unity of the movement. Panic spread through the crowd as men and women cried out, clutching wounds and falling to the ground. Lucien, pushing through the chaos, desperately tried to help, his face etched with concern. Everyone, calm down, he shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. Form a human chain to protect the wounded. Eloise, witnessing the unfolding chaos, sprang into action. Pushing past the fear gripping her heart, she raced to the barricades, tending to the injured and directing the crowd to safety. Amidst the chaos, Eloise's gaze met Lucien's. In that brief moment of connection, they exchanged a silent vow to protect one another, to stand strong in the face of adversity. Their love for each other deepened, forged in the crucible of the revolution. Together, they continued to fight for the Commune, working tirelessly to provide for the people of Paris. But as the weeks turned into months, the reality of their situation became increasingly clear. The Commune was being encircled by the Versailles army, and their time was running out. One evening, as Eloise and Lucien sat together in their apartment, the weight of their circumstances pressed down on them. "We have to leave," Lucien said finally, his voice heavy with the gravity of the situation. "There's no future here for us." Eloise, tears brimming in her eyes, nodded her agreement. They knew that staying would be futile and dangerous. As they prepared to leave, Eloise felt a sense of sadness envelop her. She had given so much to the Commune, to this city she called home, and now she had to leave it behind. But as she and Lucien stepped out into the night, hand in hand, she knew that their story was far from over. The revolution had changed them both, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. As the sun rose, casting a pale light over the city, Eloise and Lucien slipped out of Paris, joining the stream of refugees fleeing the advancing Versailles army. Behind them, the city they had fought so hard to save was being consumed by flames. The Versailles had entered and were exacting revenge on the citizens. Eloise and Lucien, along with thousands of others, walked for days, their journey marked by exhaustion and despair. But through it all, they held on to each other, finding solace in their shared experiences and undying love. Their journey led them to a small village nestled in the countryside. Here, away from the turmoil of Paris, they began to piece their lives back together. Eloise, with her indomitable spirit and unwavering compassion, quickly became a pillar of strength for the community. She organized efforts to help other refugees, sharing what little she had and offering a listening ear to those in need. Lucien, with his quiet strength and determination, threw himself into rebuilding the village, working alongside the men to repair homes and restore order. As time passed, the memory of the Paris Commune faded from the headlines, but Louis and Lucien knew that the spirit of the revolution lived on in their hearts. They had lost so much, yet they had gained something just as valuable, a profound sense of purpose, and the knowledge that they had played a part, however small, in the fight for a better world. And so they lived out their days in the small village, their love for each other and their shared history binding them together until the end. The Paris Commune of 1871 may have been crushed, but the spirit of revolution, the courage of the women who fought for it, continued to live on, inspiring generations to come. Thank you for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to get more stories like this one. The week begins. Last time we talked about how the National Assembly had moved out of Paris in the face of the March of the Women and the Commune being established. But now it's May, and they are back with an army intent on retaking Paris. Today, we begin our week of Bloody Week, Semaine Sanglante in French. Let's get into it. It's early on the morning of May 21st when the troops of Versailles breach the city. And here's where the timeline diverges from the novel. In the book, the National Assembly troops don't enter Paris until the night of the 22nd. But historical accuracy compels me to have them come in during the day so that the story moves faster. It's still dark when thousands of Versailles troops pour through the outer barriers of Paris. Because in the book, the main character doesn't wake up till later in the morning. For those who can see the sky, it is clear that the storm has passed. No more rain, no more thunder, only the soft glow of dawn and the promise of a new day. A day that for the people of Paris will be anything but new. For soon the quiet of the morning will be shattered by the roar of cannon fire, and the streets of Paris will run red with the blood of patriots and tyrants alike. Meanwhile, at the barricades of the Luxembourg, the fighting continues throughout the night. Every so often a Versailles soldier comes creeping through the darkness, looking for a place to hide. A young woman stands in the shadows watching them. When one of the soldiers emerges from the darkness and staggers toward the barricade, she asks Henry, "What should I do?" "Don't hesitate," he tells her. "Take his gun and kill him." She takes aim and pulls the trigger. The soldier collapses. Moments later, another appears, wounded, and she does the same to him. "You must try not to miss," says Henry. She looks down at the dead men at her feet and asks, "Do you think this is right? Do you think it's right to kill like that?" "We have no other choice," replies Henry grimly. "Not if we want to stay alive." As the first rays of sunlight touch the rooftops of Paris, the National Assembly troops begin their advance in earnest. Companies of infantry move through the empty streets, accompanied by the clatter of artillery. At the corner of the Rue de l'Orsine, they stop to take aim at the barricade. The defenders return fire, and the first street battle of the Semaine Sanglante has begun. The Versailles troops pull back and regroup. They have not expected such fierce resistance, and are forced to change their plans on the fly. Instead of marching into Paris and restoring order, they are forced to fall back to the suburbs. This gives the impression that the communards are winning the battle, but it is a deceptive victory. The Versailles troops are simply biding their time until they can bring more men and supplies into the city. Lucien walks along the ramparts, watching the enemy retreat. He knows that this will not last. The Versailles troops may be disorganized, but they outnumber the Communards 3-1. There aren't enough guns to go round. Most of the barricades are manned by volunteers who have never fired a weapon. There are simply too many variables. If the Versailles troops attack again, he thinks we might actually win. But what if they don't? What if they just sit and wait? What if they starve us out? As he watches, the Versailles artillery opens fire once again. The cannons roll toward the barricades, and the defenders dive for cover. One shell lands near Eloise, sending dirt and debris flying through the air. She coughs and scrambles to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. Looking round, she sees the face of a young girl she's seen at the barricade several times before. The girl lies motionless, a chunk of brick embedded in her forehead. Eloise kneels beside her, feeling for a pulse, turning the girl's head, trying to make her breathe. But it's no use. The girl is dead. Eloise feels tears pricking at her eyes, but she blinks them away. She has no time to grieve. She turns back to the barricade just as another shell explodes nearby. This time it's Henry who is hit. He lies on the ground, clutching his leg. Blood soaks through his shirt. "I'm hit," he says, his voice weak. "I need a doctor." "Don't worry," says Lucien, kneeling beside him. "I'll get you one." Lucien runs through the streets, dodging shells and debris, searching for a doctor. It seems like hours, but it's only minutes. Finally, he finds a man in a white coat. "Please," he begs, "you have to help me. My friend is dying." "Of course," says the doctor, wiping his hands on his coat. "Let's go." When they get back to the barricade, they find Henry delirious and feverish. The wound is gangrenous, and there is no hope of saving the leg. The doctor nods at Lucien. "Get the pistol," he says. "What?" Lucien looks at the doctor, confused. "You want me to shoot him? There is no other choice," says the doctor sadly. "He is suffering. It would be better if he didn't wake up." Lucien shakes his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, I can't do that." The doctor looks at him for a moment. "Very well," he says finally, "but then you must let me do it." Lucien hands him the pistol and the doctor places it to Henry's temple. "Don't feel bad about this," he says. "It's better this way." Then he pulls the trigger. Meanwhile, at the barricade on the Rue des Boulettes, the fighting is going badly. The Versailles troops have brought more reinforcements, and the Communards are running low on ammunition. Eloise watches as the men round her fall one by one. She fires her gun, but it's no use. The Versailles troops are too much. As the last of the men fall, she makes a decision. She grabs a handful of gunpowder and throws it in the air. Then she takes a red-hot musket ball from a dead soldier and throws that after it. The explosion sends sparks and debris flying in all directions. Eloise falls to her knees, covering her ears. When the smoke clears, she looks up to see the Versailles troops staring at her in disbelief. Eloise slowly gets to her feet and walks toward them, arms outstretched. "Don't shoot," she cries. "I surrender." The Versailles troops lower their weapons, surprised by her bravery. Eloise keeps walking. When she reaches them, she holds out her hands in front of her. "I surrender," she repeats. For France, one of the Versailles troops steps forward. "Don't move," he says, pointing a pistol at her. "If you make one move, I'll shoot." Eloise holds her ground, her eyes fixed on his. The Versailles soldier hesitates for a moment, then lowers his weapon. "All right," he says, "you win." Eloise smiles and throws her head back and laughs. "Come," says the Versailles soldier, It's over. At the barricades of the Rue Transon, the fighting has ended. The Versailles troops entered the street and quickly overwhelmed the defenders. They found Lucien and the others hiding in the sewers. Now they stand before a makeshift tribunal set up by the National Assembly troops. "So you are the leaders of the insurrection," says the officer in charge. "Yes," says Lucien defiantly, "and we will do it again." "Perhaps," says the officer, "but today it is over. You are all under arrest." The officer turns to the rest of the men. "As for you," he says, "you will be shot at dawn." And that is where we will end part 7. Please join me next time when we continue our journey through the Paris Commune with part 8, the Red Orchestra. Until then, remember, history is never easy. Thanks for watching. This is a story about betrayal, death and the fall of the Paris Commune. It's also the conclusion to our original series from World War I. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, we highly recommend you do so first, as this episode contains major spoilers. The year is 1871 and the Franco-Prussian War has just ended. France has lost and the Prussians are marching on Paris. The city is starving. Food is scarce and the people are desperate. Things are going so poorly that the French government has resorted to printing money with images of starving children on it. The image on the left reads, "For the love of God, help these children," while the one on the right says, "Do not let them die." But no help is forthcoming and soon the children will die anyway when Prussian troops enter Paris and occupy it. But before the Prussians can take complete control, a group of French soldiers stationed in the city refuse to surrender their weapons. Instead, they hand over their guns to the citizens and join them in declaring Paris a sovereign state free from any outside rule. They call themselves the Paris Commune. The Commune establishes a government in opposition to the one that surrendered to the Prussians, and the French army is divided. Some soldiers refuse to fight against fellow French citizens. So now the Prussians have a real fight on their hands. The people of Paris build barricades in the streets, and for 2 weeks they hold off the combined might of the German Empire and the rest of the French army. At the height of the fighting, a young woman named Eloise is tending to the wounded when she is caught by enemy soldiers and taken prisoner. Meanwhile, her brother Lucien leads a group of insurgents who fire on passing Prussian troops from behind the barricades. One day, as he takes aim at an officer riding by on a white horse, he sees something that makes him lower his weapon. It's Eloise, bound for execution. She looks back at him, pleading for him to save her. But as Lucien hesitates, a soldier beside him fires anyway, and the officer is dead. With that shot, Lucien's cover is blown, and he and his comrades retreat into the catacombs, a subterranean tunneling maze system where the dead are buried. Down in the tunnels, Lucien encounters a comrade he fought with during the siege, a man he hasn't seen since he was seriously injured and had to be evacuated from the city. The two men are overjoyed to see each other, but their reunion is cut short when the man reveals that he has been turned and is working for the French National Assembly, the government that the Commune is trying to overthrow. The double agent reveals that many of the Commune's members have been compromised and that the National Assembly plans to flush out the remaining rebels. The two men find a way out of the catacombs and part ways. Lucien resolves to flee Paris, but not before delivering an inflammatory final manifesto for the Commune. Meanwhile, Eloise is thrown into a dank, dark prison cell. She paces back and forth until a guard unlocks the door and escorts her out. He tells her that she is being pardoned, but that is obviously not the case. He is simply leading her to the guillotine. As the blade comes down, her eyes pop open and she screams for Lucien. Then everything goes black. As soon as Lucien is out of prison, He meets up with a contact who will help smuggle him out of the city. But while sneaking past some Prussian soldiers, the pair are caught. Lucien is dragged away, but not before he fires at the soldiers, buying himself some time to escape. Now alone in the dark and unfamiliar streets, he walks toward what he thinks is safety when suddenly he is surrounded by armed men. A man steps forward and introduces himself as a member of the National Assembly. He explains that the Commune is finished. The Prussians are winning and they don't want to spill any more French blood. He offers Lucien a choice: join the Assembly and swear loyalty to the new government or face execution. Lucien refuses and runs. He weaves through the streets, jumping over barricades and ducking under walls. He knows he can't stay in Paris, but he doesn't know where he can go. He remembers seeing a train full of refugees heading south earlier in the week and decides to follow them. He races across the countryside, living off the land and avoiding both Prussian and French soldiers until he finally collapses of exhaustion and hunger. When he wakes up, he is in a forest clearing. A farmer tends to him, pulling thorns out of his feet and wrapping his legs in bandages. Lucien asks the farmer for food and water, but the man tells him he can't offer him any charity. He then asks if there is a war still raging in the east, and the man replies that there is. Lucien presses the farmer for details and learns that not only has the war ended, but the Prussians have occupied Paris, and the man he helped treat earlier died from his wounds. Feeling guilty, defeated and hungry, Lucien goes back to the road and starts walking toward Paris. When he gets there, he finds the city completely changed. Gone are the barricades and the fortifications. In their place are cobblestone streets and homes with boarded-up windows. People wander around listlessly and hunger still shows on their faces. Lucien approaches a woman sitting on a wall and asks how the Commune fell. She tells him that after their forces were decimated, the remaining leaders went into hiding, including Louise Michel, the fiery leader of the women's battalions. Eventually, the National Assembly offered them a choice: leave the city or die. Most of the remaining Commune members fled into the sewers, catacombs and tunnels beneath the city, where they either starved to death or were executed. The Prussians sealed off the entrances to the tunnels and pumped poisonous gas inside, killing hundreds. Some Commune members disguised themselves as civilians and walked out of the city, but most were killed by roving National Assembly patrols. The woman pauses to wipe a tear from her eye. She continues, "I saw so much death during the siege and the fighting. At least those people died bravely. But those who died down in the tunnels, they died scared and alone, knowing that they would be forgotten." And in a way, they were right. Almost no one talks about the Commune anymore. It's like it never even happened. But you will remember us. Lucien is disgusted by what he heard, but it can't compare to what he is about to witness. As he walks further into the city, he sees bodies littering the ground, piled up on the sides of buildings and hanging from lamp posts. It's clear that these people were rounded up by the Assembly and executed. Lucien stumbles on, coming across a familiar face along the way. It's the man who betrayed Lucien in the catacombs. He is hanging by a rope from a lamp post. His tongue has been cut out and stuffed in his cheek. Lucien approaches him and spits on the man's chest. The traitor's lifeless eyes stare back accusingly. As Lucien continues to walk, he sees a poster offering a reward for the capture of remaining Commune members. But the faces on the posters aren't of wanted criminals. They are of regular people: a baker, a school teacher, a shopkeeper. Lucien's heart sinks as he realizes that anyone could turn on anyone. He feels sick to his stomach, not from hunger or thirst, but from the realization that no one is safe. Lucien leaves the city, walking down a road lined with dead bodies. All around him are signs of death. Houses are burned and destroyed. Corpses are dumped in mass graves, and a thick layer of dust covers everything. As the sun sets, Lucien comes across a small village. Smoke rises from chimneys, and villagers gather on a corner to gossip. He is about to approach them when a woman pushes a cartload of manure past him. She drops some on the ground and turns to berate him. "Why don't you get out of here? Don't you see that we are rebuilding? We don't need your kind here." Lucien considers arguing, but decides it isn't worth it. He simply nods and continues walking. He walks all night and into the next day. Finally, as he is crossing a field, he sees smoke rising in the distance. Hope springs eternal in his breast. Maybe this place will take me in. Maybe I can start a new life here. But as he gets closer, he sees that the smoke is coming from a large bonfire. He hides in some bushes and peeks over to see what is going on. On a small hill in the middle of the field are several figures. Standing round a bonfire, they are burning piles of arms, ammunition, barricades, anything that could be used to fight the Prussians or the National Assembly. The people watching the destruction are laughing and cheering. Lucien is horrified. How can these people be so happy after all that has happened? One of the men turns and catches Lucien staring. He gestures to him to come over. Lucien hesitantly approaches, and the man asks him, "Aren't you glad it's over? Don't you want to forget this terrible time?" Lucien doesn't reply. He can't speak. The man continues, "Come on then, join us. Let's forget about the Prussians and the Commune and the army. Let's forget about everything. Just look at this beautiful fire." And as Lucien stares into the flames, he, too, wants to forget. The fire reflects in his eyes. Then everything goes black. The year is 1871. France has just lost a humiliating war against the Prussians, and the people of Paris are furious with their government. They storm two of the most important prisons in the city, the Santa and the Bicata, releasing thousands of criminals and mental patients into the streets. Then they march on the remaining prisons, forcing the guards to open the gates. This is the high point of the Paris Commune, an episode that would become one of the most famous revolutions in history. But for our characters, it's only the beginning of their troubles. Let's jump back into the French Revolution, Episode 4, Part 2, where we pick up right after the last episode. At this point, there were about 30,000 National Guard troops in Paris, and they had essentially taken over the entire city. The government had fled. There was no food, and there were thousands of criminals running round the streets. It was complete anarchy. And so what did the National Guard do? They rioted. The first target of their anger was the Champs-Élysées, a large park near the Champs-Élysées where the army had been preparing fortifications to defend the city against a Prussian invasion. But instead of finding weapons and supplies, the communards found something much more exciting. The Champs-Élysées also contained an arsenal of the largest cannons in Paris. So rather than defending the city, the National Guardsmen seized the guns and headed downtown. Their destination, the Tuileries Palace, which housed the officers of the central government. Lucien watched from afar as the column approached, shouting and singing revolutionary songs. He couldn't help but be swept up in the moment. All around him, men were taking down the royalist symbols and replacing them with the tricolour. It felt like the revolution was finally coming to life. But then he saw the faces of the men carrying the red flag. They weren't young boys anymore. These were hardened veterans of the war, men who had seen too much death and destruction. One of them, a tall, thin man with a long neck, caught his eye. It was the same man who had led the charge on the previous day, hacking away at the royalists with his sword. Lucien felt a chill run down his spine. What was he getting himself into? As the column arrived at the Tuileries, a group of government soldiers attempted to block their path, but after some light skirmishing, they quickly retreated into the palace. Then came the attack. The cannons rumbled, smoke filled the air and stone rained down from the rooftops as the National Guardsmen prepared to lay siege to the building. A well-aimed cannonball smashed through the window of the royal sitting room, showering marble across the floor. The queen and her children were forced to flee through a back door as flames erupted from the walls. Soon the entire palace was ablaze and could be seen from miles round. Meanwhile, Eloise was being dragged through the streets by two burly guards. She had been captured while trying to escape Paris the day before. Now she was on her way to one of the many barricades that had sprung up throughout the city. The guards wanted to know why she had tried to leave, and although Eloise didn't understand their language, she knew better than to answer any questions. If she had anything to say, it would be in court. After a while, the guards stopped and let her go. As she turned to leave, one of them grabbed her arm and pushed her towards a house with a red flag hanging out the front. Then he disappeared inside. With no other choice, Eloise walked up the steps and knocked on the door. When it opened, she found herself face to face with a stern-looking woman. Without saying a word, the woman grabbed her bag and started rummaging through it, pulling out food, medicine, and clothing. Eloise tried to protest, but the woman cut her off. "Don't speak," she said. "You need this more than you know." Before Eloise could respond, the woman shoved the bag into her hands and pushed her back out onto the street. "Go," she said, "and don't come back." Confused but grateful, Eloise turned and hurried away. She had been walking for hours without realizing it, and now the sun was beginning to set. The sky was the color of blood, and the streets were littered with the bodies of both civilians and soldiers. Fearful of what she might find next, she quickened her pace. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the air, followed by another and another. Looking up, she realized that the beautiful Gothic spires of Notre Dame Cathedral were collapsing one by one. A few minutes later, she heard a familiar rumble and turned to see a plume of smoke rising above the trees. The fire at the Tuileries must have spread. Hurrying in that direction, she soon found the source of the smoke, the Hôtel de Ville, or Town Hall, the seat of the Commune itself. It was crumbling to dust. Over at the barricade, Lucien had managed to hide from the guards, but he could feel the heat of the fire on his face. The smell of burning would fill the air, and the roar of the flames was deafening. As he watched, a large chunk of masonry broke free from the tower and fell to the ground. He flinched as the dust and debris settled, revealing a gaping hole in the side of the building. At that moment, a grizzled veteran with a missing eye approached and put a hand on his shoulder. "Come," he said, leading him away from the barricade and towards a small alley. They were soon joined by several others, all of them looking worn and weary. Lucien realized that they had been separated from the main force and were now trapped behind enemy lines. "We have to get out of here," someone said, his voice barely a whisper. "There's nothing left for us here." Lucien nodded, knowing that he was right. They crept through the streets, staying in the shadows and avoiding the fires. Every so often, they would hear the sound of distant gunfire, reminding them of the danger that lurked round every corner. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they came across a small group of National Guardsmen manning a barricade. They were ecstatic. But when they told their story, the guardsmen shook their heads. "We can't let you through," one of them said. "The Blanks is closing in from all sides. If you try to pass, they'll capture you." Lucien felt a surge of panic. The Blanks, he knew, were the government troops who had been sent to restore order to the city. And if they were here, then that meant that they were trapped with no way out. But just then, a young woman stepped forward. "I know a way," she said, leading them through a maze of narrow streets. After what seemed like an eternity, they emerged into a small clearing. In the distance, Lucien could see the faint outline of the city wall. "That way," the woman said, pointing. "If you can reach the wall, you should be able to find a way out." Thanking her, Lucien and the others raced towards the light, hoping to escape the city before the Blank could capture them. Meanwhile, Henry was being marched through the streets in handcuffs. His head hung low, his eyes fixed on the cobblestones beneath his feet. He had been captured by the Blanks while trying to flee the city with his brother Joseph. Now, he was on his way to the nearest jail, where he would be held until such time as the government could decide what to do with him. As they passed by a group of National Guardsmen, one of them shouted, "Get him out of here, you dirty royalist scum," and spat on the ground. Henry flinched, but made no attempt to defend himself. He knew that the revolution was not going to end well, and he was just glad that he had escaped with his life. So what will happen next for Lucien and Henry? Will they be able to escape the clutches of the Blanks, or will they be thrown in prison? And what will become of Eloise? Find out in the next episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more historical tales. And for even more historical tales, check out our podcast, available on various platforms. Thanks for watching. The air grows heavy with the smell of Kadite and death. The streets are a mess of shattered stone, broken wood and blood. It's the end of the Paris Commune, but for the citizens of this once proud city, the real horror has just begun. Welcome to the series. Today, we're exploring the violent aftermath of the Paris Commune of 1871. Let's jump in. The fighting is over. In its final days, the Commune had devolved into a desperate, bloody struggle. Street by street, building by building, barricades were torn down, guns were run out of ammo and hope faded. With the Versailles army entering the city, Parisians knew the time for resistance was done, and so they abandoned their positions, melting away into the civilian population or fleeing into the countryside. Many hoped that if they laid down their arms, they would be spared. But the Versailles army wasn't interested in taking prisoners. Anyone who stayed behind was either shot or arrested. Among the last defenders was Lucien, who refused to leave his position at the Batignolles barricade until he was almost the last man standing. When he finally surrendered, he was dragged before a military tribunal. The judge didn't bother to conceal his disdain for Lucien. "So you refused to surrender your arms," he said, sneering. "You preferred to die like a dog in a corner. You will die, but not like a dog. You will die like a traitor." Lucien was sentenced to death. Elsewhere in the city, Eloise was being dragged before her own tribunal. She'd been caught with a gun in her hand after trying to storm an army barricade. But when the soldiers reached for her, she threw herself onto the ground and submitted without a fight. She hoped that if she played her cards right, she could talk her way out of this. She'd already tried to convince them that she was a nurse, but they didn't buy it. So now she was trying to convince them that she was pregnant. A woman in that state cannot be suspected of any political opinions. She said, looking up at the stern-faced officer with pleading eyes. He wasn't having it. Women are nothing but troublemakers, he snapped, shoving her roughly. Revolutionary or not, you will be executed. But not all Parisians were so harshly dealt with. Henry was given a light sentence of exile. He'd only been involved in the Commune for a few weeks, joining the provisional government as the representative of the National Guard. But he had enough enemies from his time as a journalist to make the government suspicious. When they found him, he was sent straight to prison, charged with being a German spy. But while Lucien and Eloise faced the firing squad, Henry was packed off to Algeria, far from the only person to receive such a cushy sentence. As the Versailles army searched the city for more weapons and ammunition, anyone they found who was well educated or had means was arrested and sent into exile. Meanwhile, those who hadn't played an active role in the Commune were quietly let go with a warning, though most had lost everything. Their homes had been ransacked and destroyed, and their loved ones disappeared into the crowd. In the days that followed, the streets of Paris became a hunting ground. Citizens looked out for each other, helping anyone they could get away to safety, delivering messages between loved ones or hiding wanted men in their homes. But it was a dangerous game. Turning a neighbor or a friend could mean the difference between life and death. For some, there was no choice. They had to cooperate with the army in order to save themselves. That was the case for Madame Amble, who turned her home into an orphanage after her husband, a general in the Versailles army, died defending the city during the siege. But now that the siege was over, her house was being used as a prison and her guests were being rounded up for execution. To save herself, she agreed to help the army find the remaining communards and lead them to the nearest firing squad. As loyalists and opportunists alike scrambled to save themselves, Paris was quickly being transformed. The red, white and blue tricolor flag was raised over government buildings once more. Streets were renamed back to their original names, and the cobblestones were swept clean of blood and bodies. It was as if the city was trying to scrub the memory of the Commune from the very streets. Meanwhile, the killings went on. At first, there had been some effort made to distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. But as the days passed, thousands were executed without charge or trial. The streets ran with blood, and the only sounds were the crack of gunfire and the cocking of pistols. At night, the silence was broken by the distant rumble of cannons and the shouts of angry men. Those who weren't killed were thrown into the infamous prisons of Versailles, where tens of thousands were crammed into dark, dank cells with hardly any food or water. Guards beat prisoners for sport and sometimes just for fun. There was no attempt to separate men, women and children. No one knew what was happening to the people who disappeared into the depths of the prison. No one dared ask. Of those taken prisoner, only a lucky few would ever see the outside again. One day, Eloise was woken from a restless sleep by a shout. "Get up, you dirty animal. It's your turn." She was dragged from her cell and forced into a courtyard, where a group of soldiers and police officers were lined up waiting for her. An officer stepped forward and pulled a black hood over her head. "So," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "you thought you could hide, that we wouldn't find you. Where are your papers?" "I have no papers," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Who are you? What do you want?" "Don't play coy with me," he snapped, pushing her roughly. "I know exactly who you are, and when the firing squad's finished with you, you won't be playing anything anymore." He shoved her toward a wall where a priest waited with a pistol. When he saw her, he turned pale, but he was too scared to speak up. Eloise felt a hand on hers and turned to see a young girl clutching her dress. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. "I won't let them hurt you." Eloise felt tears prickling her eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't cry. She wouldn't cry. The little girl stepped back, her eyes wide with terror, and Eloise watched as she was dragged away and executed in front of her. Then she turned back to the priest and closed her eyes, waiting for the end. Across the city, Lucien was led to the same sort of courtyard. He could hear the echo of gunfire, the shouts of men, the screams of dying horses. He could smell blood and smoke. His hands were bound behind his back, and he was pushed to his knees. Suddenly, he felt a sharp prick in his arm. He flinched and looked up to see a soldier holding a syringe. "What did you put in me?" Lucien shouted. "It doesn't matter," the soldier sneered, kicking him in the back. "It'll put you to sleep before you know it." Lucien struggled to his feet and shook his head violently, trying to clear it. The soldier brought the syringe back and jabbed him in the neck. Henry, meanwhile, had been on the ship for days. He watched as Paris receded into the distance, wondering if he'd ever see it again. He'd managed to bribe the captain to look the other way when he threw his weapons overboard. But he still wasn't sure if he'd be able to sneak back into France undetected. But then he remembered why he'd left. In Paris, he'd been branded a traitor, accused of being a German spy and of crimes against the Republic. In Marseille, he'd been stopped and searched 3 times, but no one had recognized him. Maybe he was safe, maybe he was free. Except that wherever he went, he heard voices. Voices whispering, "Traitor, spy, anarchist." He could feel their eyes boring into his back. He couldn't escape the past. He couldn't outrun who he was, and eventually, he started hearing the voices inside his own head. That concludes part 10 of the Paris Commune. Click here to watch part 9, The Siege, or click here to watch part 11, The Shadow of the Commune. Don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every Friday. Thanks for watching. 1872, Europe. A continent still reeling from a decade of war is bracing for more. The great powers are preparing for another round of bloodshed when suddenly a delegate arrives bearing an unexpected message. He's come from a secret revolutionary government, the product of a workers' uprising in the city of Paris. And he's here to tell his story. So we talked about the Paris Commune before. It was this amazing experience where these workers took over the city of Paris. But it ended badly because they couldn't actually govern, and then the National Assembly came back and they were like, "We're gonna take over now." And then they executed a bunch of people. We have talked about that before. What we haven't talked about is what happens after. What happens to the people who lived through it? Let's talk about it. Let's go back to our 3 characters. We have Henry, who's gone into exile in London. We have Lucien, who's back in Paris and running a small business. And we have Eloise, who's also back in Paris, but she's still traumatized by everything she went through during the Commune. In London, Henry has turned himself into a sort of living monument to the ideals of the Paris Commune. He has made it his mission to spread the word of the workers' revolution and keep its memory alive. He writes articles for newspapers, gives speeches to anyone who will listen, and attends every public demonstration in support of the Commune, even if it means going hungry. His friends urge him to moderate his rhetoric, tone down his criticism of the government, and focus on making something of himself. But Henry won't compromise. Instead, he throws himself completely into his work. And soon his efforts pay off. He meets a publisher who agrees to publish his book on the Commune and finds a patron willing to bankroll his research into the history of socialist thought. Finally, it seems Henry's sacrifice is paying off. He has a career, a purpose, and a future. Maybe now he can put the horrors of the past behind him and move on with his life. Back in Paris, Lenny has returned to his old job at the print shop. But it's not the same. Everything feels different. The building has been damaged during the siege and repaired with cheap materials. The tools are worn out and the presses are slow. The once proud workshop now feels like a shabby relic of the past. To make matters worse, Leconte is no longer interested in politics. He's too afraid of getting caught up in another revolution. This leaves Lucien feeling isolated and disillusioned. He misses the camaraderie of the Commune, the sense of purpose, and the excitement of the struggle. Most of all, he misses his friends, especially Eloise. She had been like a sister to him during the Commune, a source of strength and inspiration. But since the National Assembly returned to power, she had become distant and withdrawn. He knows that she's suffering, but he doesn't know how to help her. Eloise is haunted by nightmares and flashbacks to the violence and destruction of the Commune. She can't sleep without taking laudanum, a drug made from opium. She has tried to put the experience behind her by throwing herself into her work as a seamstress, but it's not working. She's too afraid to go back to her old apartment. She knows that her family are secretly relieved that she survived the Commune. But the years of poverty and privation have taken their toll, and they can't or won't help her. So she has moved into a cheap room in Beauville and opened a small clinic, seeing mostly poor children who can't afford to go anywhere else. Her patients are often the victims of the same kind of violence that she experienced during the Commune, and she treats them with a mixture of skill and compassion. But she can't save everyone, and the sight of their pain and suffering brings back home trauma. She feels trapped in a cycle of despair, unable to escape the horrors of the past. But one day a young boy comes to her for help. He's been beaten by his father, a member of the National Assembly's militia. As Eloise tends to his wounds, she remembers the little boy's father from the Commune. He was a member of the National Guard, a man who believed in the revolution as much as she did. But when the Commune fell and the National Assembly returned to power, he had become one of the militiamen tasked with putting down the rebellion. And now, he was beating his own son, a child of the Commune, for no reason of his own. Suddenly, Eloise realizes that she can't keep hiding from her past. She has to do something to make things right. She goes to see the boy's father, a hulking brute of a man with a cruel face and a violent temper. But she doesn't try to argue with him. She doesn't try to convince him that he's wrong. She simply tells him that he needs to let his son go, that he's done enough damage already. And to her surprise, it works. The man lets his son go and Eloise takes him back to her clinic. She nurses him back to health and then she does something she hasn't done in years. She smiles. Meanwhile, Henry's life in London is falling apart. His research has taken him deep into the history of socialist thought, and he has become convinced that the Paris Commune was just a temporary setback in the inevitable progress of history. The workers will rise again, he says, and when they do, he will be ready. But his friends and colleagues don't share his enthusiasm. They tell him to be realistic, to accept that the Commune is finished and there's nothing he can do to change that. But Henry refuses. Instead, he doubles down on his research, throwing himself into his work and ignoring the people around him. Then one day he gets a letter from Paris. It's from Lucien, and it tells Henry that Eloise is dying. He doesn't know what to do. On one hand, He wants to stay in London and continue his work. He feels like he's finally making some progress, and he doesn't want to give that up. But on the other hand, he can't bear the thought of Eloise dying alone. He knows that she needs him, and he's the only one who can help her. So he makes a decision. He packs up his things and heads back to Paris. When he gets there, he finds out that Eloise has already died. But he's not too late. He's able to say goodbye to her, and he's grateful for that. But he knows that he has to do something to honor her memory. So he does the only thing he can think of. He starts a newspaper dedicated to the memory of Eloise and the ideals of the Paris Commune. Years pass. Lucien becomes a successful publisher, and his newspaper becomes the leading voice of the socialist movement in France. But he never forgets the lessons of the past. He knows that the only way to honor the memory of the Commune is to keep fighting for a better world. A world without poverty, without injustice, and without war. And so he continues to publish his newspaper, to speak out against the injustices of the world, and to fight for a better future for all. But what about Lucien? What happens to him? Well, Lucien never really recovers from Eloise's death. He becomes a recluse, spending his days in his office and his nights in cheap hotels. He stops seeing his friends, and he stops believing in anything. The fire that had burned inside him during the Commune is extinguished, leaving him cold and empty. He lives out the rest of his days alone, haunted by the ghosts of the past. And that's the end of our story. Or is it? Well, if you want to hear more stories like this, then stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for watching. They are coming from me because I am a journalist and they can't stand the sight of a pen. It's March 1871 in Paris, and the city is in chaos. For the past 3 months, it has been under siege by the Prussians. The streets are filled with corpses, starvation, and disease. Today, the French National Assembly will vote on who should run the city. Should it be the current provisional government or a new radical socialist group called the Commune? And what does this mean for the future of France? Elodie walks through the carnage of Paris. Homes are burned, shops are looted, and corpses litter the street. It has been a month since her brother, Henry, died defending the city during the siege. The 30-year-old had never been much of a fighter, but when the Prussians arrived, he picked up a gun and fought alongside his friends until he was unalived by a stray bullet. Now she comes to pay her respects at his grave. But it's not only her brother she's mourning. The entire nation is broken. What started as a revolution against an outdated monarchy had descended into a war that may rip the country apart. Born in 1840, Eloise grew up hearing about the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. These were the principles of the French Revolution that had toppled the aristocracy and ended feudalism. But now it seems like France is descending into chaos once again. In February 1871, Napoleon III, nephew of the great emperor and leader of the Second Empire, was forced to abdicate after a disastrous defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. A provisional government was set up and the nation's future was put to a vote. While most of France would elect the provisional government, Paris chose a different path. They elected the Commune, a radical socialist party. They wanted sweeping changes, universal male suffrage, abolition of the death penalty, free education and health care, a radical restructuring of society. The provisional government in Versailles refused these demands and began to crack down. Troops loyal to the government stormed Paris and began arresting suspected radicals. So the Commune fought back. On March 1871, they seized key government buildings and raised a red flag over the Paris town hall. They proclaimed that they would hold elections for a new government. This was a challenge to the authority of the nation itself. France was now in civil war. She comes across the cemetery. It is a vast expanse of tombstones and monuments. Some are beautiful marble mausoleums, while others are simple headstones marking the graves of the unknown. She heads toward the back where her brother is buried. A young man is sitting by the graveside. He looks up as Eloise approaches and stands up. He introduces himself as Lucien. He tells her that he was a friend of her brother's and that he reads all of Henry's writings. He thinks that the ideas of the Commune are more important than ever today. And so we come to the Paris Commune of 1871, a brief but intense experiment in direct democracy. Under the Commune, workers took control of factories, land was redistributed, and universal male suffrage was introduced. Although the Commune lasted only 2 months, its impact was profound. Its members believed that they were creating a new kind of society, one based on equality and democracy. However, the Commune's opponents saw it as a dangerous threat to order and stability. The conflict between the two sides culminated in the bloody suppression of the Commune in 1871. Despite its short lifespan, the Paris Commune remains an important moment in the history of socialism and democracy. As the fighting intensified, the Commune's leaders knew that they were outgunned and outmanned. They appealed to the workers of Europe to rise up and support them. But their calls were largely ignored. On May 21, 1871, the Versailles government launched a final assault on the city. The Communards fought back, but they were eventually forced to surrender. The Versailles government responded with a brutal crackdown. Thousands of Communards were arrested, executed or deported. Women and children were not spared. More than 20,000 people were missing in the fighting and the crackdown that followed. The red flag was taken down from the town hall and replaced with the blue, white and red of the French tricolor. We watch as Lucien leaves the gravesite. He is going to join a group of young activists who want to continue the work of the Commune, but he knows that it won't be easy. The shadow of the Versaillais looms large over Paris and the rest of France. But he's not afraid. He believes that the ideas of the Commune are worth fighting for. As he walks away, we see the red flag of the Commune fluttering in the wind. It is a symbol of hope for a better future, a future based on equality, democracy and freedom. 10 years later, the city has rebuilt itself. Shops line the streets and people go about their daily lives. But the wounds of the past are still fresh. Many of the old buildings are still scarred from the fighting, and the memory of those who died is still strong. Eloise returns to Père Lachaise cemetery to pay her respects to her brother and the other victims of the siege. She meets a young man named Lucien who tells her that he was a friend of her brother. He shows her a wall where the names of the fallen Communards are etched. Among them is Lucien's name. Eloise realizes that the spirit of the Commune lives on in whispers in the wind, in the hearts of those who fight for a better world. As the sun sets over Paris, Eloise joins Lucien and the other young people at a gathering in honor of the fallen. They remember the courage of those who fought for their ideals and vowed to continue their struggle. The camera pans away, showing the city of lights twinkling in the darkness. The spirit of the Commune may have been crushed, but its ideals live on. The people of Paris have shown that they are willing to fight for their rights, and that their determination will not be broken. The Paris Commune of 1871 was a watershed moment in the history of socialism and democracy. Though it was ultimately crushed by the forces of reaction, its legacy lived on to inspire future generations of activists and revolutionaries. The ideas of worker control, universal male suffrage, and direct democracy were radical for their time, but they're now commonplace in many parts of the world. The Paris Commune showed that ordinary people can take control of their own destiny and create a better world for themselves. Though the flames of the Commune may have been extinguished, its light continues to shine brightly today. The fall of the Commune was a devastating blow to the hopes and dreams of the French working class. But it also had far-reaching consequences for the future of Europe. The brutality of the Versailles government in crushing the uprising created a climate of fear and repression that allowed the forces of reaction to take power across the continent. The Red Army, which had played such a key role in defeating the Prussians, was disbanded and its members persecuted. The socialist movement went underground and its leaders went into exile. But the ideas of the Commune continued to circulate in clandestine publications and secret societies. The Paris Commune also had a profound impact on the development of socialist theory. The experiences of the workers and intellectuals who participated in the uprising provided valuable lessons about the nature of class struggle and the necessity for a revolutionary transformation of society. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the founders of communism, hailed the Commune as a new form of society, one in which the working class would take control of the means of production and establish a classless society. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Paris Commune is the example it set for future generations of activists. The courage and determination of the communists in the face of overwhelming odds has inspired countless struggles for social justice and democracy around the world. From the Russian Revolution to the Spanish Civil War, from the workers' uprisings in East Germany to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, the spirit of the Commune has been a constant presence. Today, the ideas of the Commune are more relevant than ever. In an age of growing inequality and political polarization, the struggle for a democracy and social justice is more important than ever. The legacy of the Commune reminds us that ordinary people can take control of their own destiny and create a better world for themselves. The story of the Paris Commune is one of courage, determination and hope. It is a story that needs to be told and retold until the ideals of democracy, equality and freedom are realized for all people. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our other videos on the French Revolution or our series on the Russian Revolution. And if you love our animated history, you can find more on our channel. I know that, look, you think this story is over. No more bloodshed, no more fear. But the past isn't so easy to escape. Not when it's still alive in the hearts of men. And what's past is prologue. So let us take one last walk through the ruins before we say goodbye. It's time for our final reflections. Ashes of the Commune. For our last scene, we return to Louise and her daughter Eloise at their home in the Rue de l'Enfer. After hiding from the Versailles for weeks, they finally feel safe to emerge from their hiding hole. The streets are quiet. The fighting has stopped. The tension is gone. It's as if the neighborhood has exhaled a long-held breath. The air is thick with dust and debris, the stench of waste and decay. But there is hope in the air, too, like a fragile flower pushing up through a crack in the pavement. Eloise gathers some of the rubble and places it in a small bowl. She turns to her mother, eyes wide with wonder. What do you think they will find in the ruins? She asks. Louise takes her daughter's hand. They will find the ashes of the Commune, she says, her voice trembling with emotion. On the previous Sunday, Versailles had fallen. The Communards had triumphed. The streets had run red with the blood of tyrants. But victory is a double-edged sword. With the tyrant gone, the people must carve out their own destiny. They are exhausted, demoralized, starving, wounded, afraid. As they survey the damage, they see that much of the city is in ruins. Whole sections of the city have been leveled, homes are burned and destroyed. Businesses are looted and destroyed. Shops are empty, shelves stripped bare. All around them, Parisians pull debris from the wreckage, searching for something to salvage. A chair, a blanket, a pot, a piece of wire. Anything that can be reused to rebuild their lives. In the Champ de Mars, thousands of communards have gathered to bury the martyrs of the barricades. Men, women and children stand shoulder to shoulder, united in their grief and their anger. They pile dirt over the corpses, covering them with the red flag of the Commune. Each shovel of dirt is a prayer for the dead, each layer of earth a promise to remember. They come upon a mass grave filled with the bodies of women and children. The crowd grows silent. A young girl steps forward. She kneels beside the grave and crosses herself. Then she begins to pray. God have mercy on the souls of these children, she whispers. They died for our sins. They died for our freedom. God have mercy on them. At the Hôtel de Ville, a group of communards gather round a table covered with papers and documents. They are poring over a list of names, the names of those who were arrested or went missing during the uprising. They are trying to piece together what happened to them. Did they escape? Are they dead? Were they taken to the infamous prison at Versailles? Among them is a young man named Henry. His face haggard, his clothes in tatters. He is searching for the name of his sister, Marie. He doesn't want to believe that she is dead, but he knows that if she was taken to Versailles, she probably won't be coming back. He runs his finger down the list, his heart sinking with each passing moment. Finally, he finds her name, Marie Lefebvre, missing. He closes his eyes and lets out a long sigh. He feels as though the breath has been knocked out of him. He sinks to his knees and buries his head in his hands. Round him, the other communards murmur their condolences, but he doesn't hear them. He is lost in his own world of grief. In the Tourets garden, among the statues and fountains and manicured hedges, two figures stroll slowly. They are lovers, or at least they were before the fighting began. Now, they are ghosts haunting the ruins of their former selves. The man, Raoul, is a journalist. The woman, Juliette, is an actress. Before the revolution, they met in secret. Their love was forbidden, dangerous. But now, they don't have to hide anymore. There is no society, no rules, no consequences. But even in paradise, love can die. Juliet walks ahead, her head held high. Raoul follows, his eyes fixed on the ground. He is lost in thought, replaying the events of the past few weeks in his mind. He can still hear the roar of the cannons, the screams of the dying. He can still see the flames leaping toward the sky. He is haunted by the ghosts of the past. Juliet stops walking and turns to Raoul, her eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" she asks. He jumps, startled by her sudden appearance. "Yes, I'm fine," he says quickly. "I'm sorry. I was just thinking about," she presses. He hesitates, then sighs. "About everything that's happened," he says softly. "The fighting, the death, the destruction. I keep seeing the faces of the dead everywhere I go." She steps closer, her hand resting on his arm. "It's going to be all right, Raoul," she whispers. "We're going to rebuild. We'll make it better than before." But he shakes his head, his eyes distant. "No, it won't be the same," he says sadly. "We've changed. We'll never be the same again." Eloise sits at the kitchen table writing a letter. Her mother watches her, a mixture of pride and sadness on her face. Eloise dips her pen in ink and writes, "My dearest Henry, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to you today to tell you about the wonderful things that have happened here since the departure of the Versailles. The streets are filled with the laughter of children and the sound of hammers as the people set about the task of rebuilding their lives. The markets are full of fresh fruits and vegetables, and the bakeries are filled with the smell of freshly baked bread. The people are beginning to heal from the wounds of war, and we are all looking forward to a brighter future. Eloise pauses, then adds another sentence. I know that my mother has suffered greatly during these past weeks, but I want you to know that she thinks of you often and prays for your safe return. She dips her pen in ink and writes, with love and affection, your friend, Eloise. Eloise folds the letter and hands it to her mother. Please give this to Henry, she says. Louise takes the letter, her fingers trembling. She looks down at her daughter, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Eloise, she whispers. You are a good girl. Eloise hugs her mother. I love you, she says. And I love Henry. Louise holds her daughter close, then breaks away and walks to the window. She looks out at the ruined city, her face etched with worry. I don't know what will become of us, she murmurs. And so the story of the Paris Commune ends not with a bang but a whimper. The ideals of the Commune, equality, justice, solidarity, are buried under the rubble, but they are not forgotten. The memory of the Commune will live on in the hearts and minds of the people until it happens. Again, until next time, comrades, remember, the revolution will be televised.